She blocked you. She ghosted. Now you're sitting there, scrolling through messages, trying to figure out what went wrong. You were there for her. You gave her everything. You made her feel like the center of your world. And that's exactly when she lost interest. But here's the twist. The second you vanish from her radar, the moment you stop reaching out, stop explaining, stop needing her approval, that's when she suddenly starts thinking about you again. Not because you said something clever, not because she realized she loves you, but because your silence screams louder than your presence ever could. Comment, "I am the prize," if you've ever felt that shift, before we go deeper. The Stoic Relationship ebook for men is now available. This is the kind of blueprint men were never supposed to have. No gimmicks, no fluff, just the psychological truth about what women actually respect and why. It's only available for a limited time to preserve this knowledge. You can check the link in the comments. Every man at some point has felt the burn of being too available. Texting first, double texting, overthinking every emoji, every reply time, every scene at 8:47 p.m. And where did that get you? You weren't rewarded. You weren't appreciated. You were sidelined. Modern dating has flipped the game. We're in an era where effort isn't just ignored, it's punished. You try to communicate, you're too much. You ask for clarity, you're insecure. You show you care, suddenly you're the backup option. Meanwhile, the man who walks away without a word, the one who disappears without closure, that's the one who lives in her head rent-free. Not because he's perfect, not because he's rude, but because he's rare. And the rarest trait in a man today? Stoic detachment. Let's break down what really happens when a man pulls away and why women can't resist the man who chooses detachment. Number 1. She craves what she can't control. She doesn't admit it, not to you, not to her friends, not even to herself. But the truth is deeper than surface-level attraction, more primal than logic, and it lives beneath her every decision. She is drawn to what she cannot fully define, to the man whose energy cannot be contained, to the mystery of presence without dependence. And that's why your absence shifts something in her chest, not because you pulled away, but because in doing so, you disrupted the emotional script she's used to playing. She's not chasing love, she's chasing the part of herself that felt powerful when she knew she could summon your attention with a text, a glance, or a hint of vulnerability. But when you stopped responding, not out of anger, but out of peace, it flipped her understanding of you upside down. You no longer orbit her, and that loss of emotional pull, it shatters the illusion that she was the sun. Every day she checks the space you once occupied, and every day that space grows quieter, colder, more unsettling. She won't tell anyone about the weight in her chest when your name doesn't pop up. She won't talk about how many times she types your name into the search bar and deletes it. She won't confess that she replays the last conversation, looking for answers she can't decode because she doesn't want to admit that she lost control. But inside, it's chaos. Because she wasn't ready for you to stop needing her. She wasn't prepared for the emotional gravity to shift. And that shift, it rewires everything. It turns the man she assumed she had wrapped around her finger into the question she can't stop asking. Women don't obsess over the man who gives them everything. They lose sleep over the one who became everything and then vanished into his own life. And no, this isn't about being toxic. It's not about playing games. It's about alignment. When you finally understand your value, when your purpose takes priority over your pain, when your peace becomes louder than your longing, everything about your energy changes. You walk different. You speak different. You no longer reach out because the part of you that once needed to be seen by her is now being seen by the man in the mirror who finally knows who he is. And she feels that in ways she can't put into words, because women, by nature, seek security, not in money, not in status, in emotional certainty. And when you remove the emotional reward she once received from your attention, when you stop playing the role of the ever-available, ever-forgiving, ever-waiting man, you force her to confront the reality she never anticipated, that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as irreplaceable as she believed. And that realization tears at her confidence more than 1,000 arguments ever could. Because it means she has to face herself. It means she has to look at her own reflection and wonder why the man who once made her feel like the center of the universe no longer sees her as necessary. And the worst part? She can't fix it. She can't repair what wasn't broken. She can't win back what you no longer want. And that truth becomes her obsession, not because she wants to love you better, but because she needs to understand why the script changed and she was written out of the ending. That's what happens when a man reclaims his energy, when he learns that his attention is a gift, not a guarantee, when he realizes that peace is worth more than temporary comfort. You become the echo she can't silence in her mind, the what-if that lingers when her phone buzzes with someone else's name but doesn't bring the same rush. And slowly, you stop being a chapter. You become a benchmark, and no one else quite measures up. Because once a woman loses control of the man who truly detached, not to punish but to evolve, she spends the rest of her life wondering what she had, what she broke, and what she'll never touch again. Number 2. Neediness destroys attraction. There's a shift that happens deep inside a man when he realizes that no amount of effort will ever buy him the respect of a woman who sees him as an emotional servant, not a sovereign force. And that realization changes everything, not just in how he approaches women, but in how he views himself, his value, and his place in the world. You start by thinking that showing her how much you care will bring her closer, that giving her more time, more energy, more validation will make her feel safe, seen, special, but it does the opposite. The more you show up uninvited, the more she recoils. The more you give without boundaries, the more she devalues the very parts of you that once made her curious. Neediness is not about being emotional. It's not about vulnerability. It's about dependence. It's the signal that your self-worth is on loan to her responses. And the second she feels that, she begins to drift. Slowly at first, less enthusiasm in her replies, longer pauses between messages, more excuses, more distractions. But eventually, the interest vanishes altogether. Because no woman, regardless of how much she says she wants to be loved, desires to carry the emotional weight of a man who can't stand on his own. And that truth hurts. It burns. Because most men have been taught that being good, being available, being emotionally supportive will earn them loyalty. But they weren't told that loyalty has to be inspired, not begged for. Women don't fall for availability. They fall for certainty. They fall for presence. Not presence that pleads, but presence that stands tall in its own frame. The man who is busy building himself, who can walk into a room and command respect without a single word. He doesn't need to prove anything. His absence says enough. But neediness, it's like a slow leak in the tire of your respect. Every needy text you send, every just checking in, every "I miss you" that goes unanswered, it deflates the image of strength she once attached to you. You stop being the mountain she wanted to climb and become the ground she walks over. She might still talk to you, she might still entertain your presence, but deep down, she's already detached. And here's the irony. Most men only become needy because they gave their best parts to someone who never asked for them. You rearranged your schedule. You ignored your gut. You gave her access to your attention without making her earn it. And now, You're confused why she's pulling back. She's pulling back because she doesn't feel the weight of who you are anymore. You're light. You're floating around her life without purpose. And women don't fall in love with clouds. They fall in love with the ground that anchors them. The man who doesn't chase. The man who doesn't rush to reply. The man who lives a life so full, so focused, so fueled by something beyond her that she feels lucky to even get a piece of his time. That's the man who captures her, and not just her attention, but her investment. And if you've lost that, it's because somewhere along the line you convinced yourself that more effort equals more value. But the truth is, you don't attract her with what you give. You attract her by what you withhold until it's earned. Because when a man becomes the prize, he doesn't give access, he gives opportunity. And if she doesn't take it, he doesn't lower the standard. He closes the door. That's how attraction is built. That's how respect is born. That's how the man who used to text 3 times a day becomes the one she regrets taking for granted. You must understand this. There is no love without respect, and there is no respect without restraint. Be the man she has to qualify for. Be the man who doesn't explain his worth. Be the man who never needs her approval to feel whole. That man doesn't just attract her, he transforms her, because he reminds her that the real power was never in chasing her. It was in mastering himself. Number 3. Detachment is the ultimate power. There is a moment in every man's life when he must decide what kind of story he's going to live, whether he will be the one who constantly waits for someone else to give him permission to be valuable, or the one who reclaims his identity, piece by piece, from every situation, person, and past self that convinced him he wasn't enough on his own. And that moment, that exact internal shift, is what separates the man who begs for love from the man who commands it. Not through words or manipulation, but through absolute mastery of his internal world. Because detachment is not about pretending you don't care or playing emotional games to appear stronger than you are. It is about truly, deeply realizing that your peace is worth more than being understood, more than being accepted, more than being loved in the way you once thought you needed. And once that truth clicks inside your soul, everything else becomes noise. You no longer look at your phone waiting for her name to light up the screen because your attention is finally directed towards something far more important: your path, your purpose, your progress. You stop explaining your intentions to people who never tried to understand you in the first place because your voice no longer trembles at the thought of being misunderstood by those who never listened when you were speaking your truth with trembling honesty. Detachment is the refusal to sacrifice your identity on the altar of someone else's temporary emotions. It is the discipline to stay centered in a world that constantly tries to pull you back into patterns that broke you the first time. You wake up one day and realize you don't need to send that long message. You don't need to chase closure from someone who slammed the door in your face and blamed you for the echo. You don't need to prove your worth to someone who made you question it by withholding the very affection they dangled to control your loyalty, because you finally remember what it feels like to be grounded in your own power. The power to say no, the power to walk away, the power to love yourself enough to never again beg to be loved back. And when a man begins to operate from that space, he doesn't have to announce it. He doesn't post it. He doesn't argue with those who challenge it. He simply lives it, in the way he breathes, in the way he speaks, in the way he stops trying to be chosen and starts choosing himself. And the world around him changes. Suddenly, the people who once took him for granted begin to feel uneasy around his presence. Not because he's angry, not because he's withdrawn, but because he no longer participates in the emotional chaos that once defined his relationships. He no longer jumps when they reach. He no longer explains when they assume. He no longer waits when they hesitate. And in that clarity, he becomes magnetic, not because he tries, but because he is. Women start to notice the difference. They sense the shift. And the ones who once dismissed him now feel a strange void they can't quite define, because he no longer offers the energy they fed on without reciprocation. He is no longer the emotional caretaker they could run to when life got complicated. He is now a standard. And that standard is untouchable, because it was built in the fires of his own abandonment, in the quiet nights when he questioned his worth, in the long walks he took alone, because he couldn't stomach the weight of conversations that never saw him. And now, he walks with a different rhythm, talks with a different cadence, looks at life with eyes that have seen themselves in the deepest despair and chosen to rise anyway. That is the man no one forgets. Not because he left a scar, but because he left a legacy, a reminder that you don't have to fight for what's real, and that anything that demands the sacrifice of your peace was never meant to stay. So yes, detachment is the ultimate power, not because it makes you distant, but because it brings you home to yourself. Not because it isolates you, but because it connects you to the only source that never leaves, you. And in a world where everyone is desperate to be liked, chosen, loved, and understood, you become rare. Not because you have more, but because you finally know you are enough without anyone having to say it. Number 4, she will try to pull you back. When she senses that her presence no longer moves you, that her words no longer have the power to redirect your focus, that her emotional rhythm is no longer the beat you dance to, she won't react with clarity or humility. She'll react with patterns, with subtle tests wrapped in old memories. With soft hooks, she hopes you'll bite just once more, not because she misses you, not because she's had a change of heart, but because she cannot accept that the version of you who once gave her unconditional access has finally locked the doors and walked away from the cage you once called love. You'll notice it first in a "hey" that lands on your phone like a whisper from a chapter you stopped reading. Not because you ran out of pages, but because you outgrew the story. And that message, seemingly innocent, isn't just a greeting. It's an invitation back into the loop of uncertainty she used to control, a loop where your emotions were currency and your peace collateral. And she'll disguise her intentions, weaving humor into her bait, referencing old jokes, familiar phrases, emotional callbacks that once pulled you in, and it won't feel aggressive. It'll feel nostalgic, like she's reminding you of what once was. But what she's truly doing is checking if she still has keys to the door you now keep guarded. She won't come back with an apology. She'll come back with confusion, pretending to not remember the weight of the wounds she left behind, hoping that your desire for connection will override your memory of pain. She'll ask about your life, not because she's genuinely curious, but because she wants to map out what parts of you she's still allowed to touch. And if you engage, even slightly, she'll begin the slow rebuild of the pedestal you once placed her on, carefully placing herself back on top of your emotional priority list, hoping you'll forget the time she left you waiting, wondering and worthless. But the difference now is that you're not the same. You've felt the weight of detachment. You've learned what it means to stand alone and not be lonely. You've tasted the clarity of peace, and you can smell the manipulation in her tone, no matter how sugar-coated it is. And so you don't react, not with anger, not with longing, not with resentment, but with stillness. Because your growth is not a weapon, it's a wall, a boundary forged from sleepless nights and hard-won self-respect. And while she knocks gently at the gates of your new life, hoping to be let back in, you remember the cost of every open door you once left unguarded. She may escalate, she may guilt-trip, she may even provoke, just to feel something from you. But your lack of emotional dependence now reads like foreign language to someone who was used to your emotional fluency, and she starts to panic, not outwardly, not dramatically, but internally in those quiet spaces where her confidence once rested, because it was never about love, it was about access. And now access has been denied. You're no longer the safety net. You're no longer the rescue plan. You're not a text away, not an option on standby. And in losing that, she hasn't just lost you. She's lost her ability to escape accountability. That is what she truly fears. That she may have pushed away the one man who finally stopped returning. And when you no longer play her game, she no longer gets to pretend it was never won. Number 5. She'll wonder if she was just a phase. The moment she realizes you haven't come back, that your absence isn't a pause but a conclusion, that your disinterest isn't temporary but rooted in genuine peace, a quiet fear begins to rise inside her. Not because she still loves you, but because she's starting to question if you ever truly needed her at all. And that fear isn't rooted in heartbreak, but in ego, in the unsettling thought that maybe, just maybe, she was never as unforgettable as she imagined. And now, in the space you left behind, there is an echo that sounds like doubt, a whisper that asks, "Was I just a placeholder?" She scrolls through your old messages, not because she misses the content, but because she's searching for confirmation that she mattered, that she wasn't just an emotional convenience or a season you passed through on the way to becoming who you are now. But the timestamps don't lie. The patterns are gone. The attention has shifted, and she feels it, not just in your silence, but in her own reflection. You see, women rarely mourn the man they left. They mourn the pedestal they believed they'd always have in his life. And now, standing outside the walls of your evolution, she's peering in, seeing the version of you she didn't believe was possible. The focused man, the disciplined man, the man who doesn't wait, the man who doesn't text, the man who doesn't ask, doesn't plead, doesn't hope. And it's that version of you that haunts her, not because he's cold, but because he's whole. She thought she was your climax, but now she realizes she was just a chapter. And chapters don't return. They get read once, learned from, and turned forever. She tries to convince herself that she made the right choice, that walking away, pulling back, losing interest was justified. But every time she sees your name, hears a song that once connected you, sees a photo you're tagged in by people she doesn't know, that narrative begins to crumble, because nothing stings like being replaceable. And now, you're not bitter, you're not vengeful, you're just gone. Not as a statement, but as a standard. And that confuses her more than if you had stayed angry, because detachment leaves no mess, it leaves no openings, it just leaves her alone with questions she can't ask, and answers she's afraid to face. Was I just a phase? She wonders, not in words, but in thoughts she buries beneath distractions. And the truth echoes back in the rhythm of your absence. Yes, not because you used her, but because you outgrew her, because your need for connection was replaced with self-awareness, because your pain turned into power, because your loyalty shifted from her to your own journey. And that realization is one she can't share with anyone. It lives in the pause before she speaks, in the flicker of her eyes when someone mentions your name, in the moment she realizes that her name hasn't crossed your lips since the day you left. That's when she understands that phases don't return. They teach. And you, my brother, were never meant to stay in a story where your soul wasn't honored. You were meant to grow beyond it, to rise from it, to become the man who closes chapters with gratitude and moves forward without dragging old ghosts. And now, she lives with the memory, not of what you did, but of who you became when she stopped believing you ever would. Number 6. She'll mirror your energy. She never meant to follow your lead, not intentionally, not with awareness, but something inside her began to shift when your presence no longer revolved around her, when your actions stopped being predictable, when the rhythm she used to rely on changed without warning or announcement. And though she will never say it out loud, the discomfort she now feels isn't rejection. It's the absence of the control she thought she had. And in that discomfort, something ancient and unconscious rises in her. The desire to reclaim that rhythm, not by force, but by adaptation. She begins to study you again, not as the man who once pursued her, but as the mystery she now wants to decode. And every small change in your tone, your timing, your availability becomes a signal she interprets, trying to match it, not because she's playing a game, but because she's trying to feel seen again in your world that no longer needs her presence to function. She used to lead the dynamic, but now, without realizing it, she adjusts her replies, her behavior, her attention to reflect the emotional shift you've made. And it isn't manipulation, it's instinct. People crave emotional equilibrium, and when a man reclaims his peace, his purpose, his power, those who once fed on his uncertainty begin to experience an imbalance they can't explain. And her subconscious solution is to recalibrate, to draw nearer, not with words but with imitation, to follow the trail of your detachment with breadcrumbs of her own, hoping you'll take notice, hoping you'll engage. But you don't. Not because you're angry, not because you're distant, but because your life is no longer defined by the reactions of someone who once made you question your value. And that change becomes uncomfortable for her, because she's used to being the emotional center of gravity, the one who is pursued, not the one who adapts. And now she's unsure of herself, unsure of what to say, how to say it, how much to give, when to pull back, because your disinterest doesn't come with cues, it comes with peace. She mimics the energy, but it's empty. She tries to reflect your focus, but it's surface level, because she hasn't done the work. She's reacting, not evolving, and you see through it, not with judgment, but with clarity. You understand that emotional mimicry isn't connection, it's survival. She's adjusting because she senses you've changed, and in trying to stay close, she imitates what she doesn't yet understand, the stillness, the power, the indifference. But you've earned that. You bled for that. You sat with yourself long enough to silence the need for validation. You built a life she can't just walk back into. So while she's mimicking your distance, you're embodying your truth. And that difference is what creates the divide she now feels, but can't explain. She wonders why you don't respond like before, why you don't engage with her signals, why your energy no longer wraps around hers. And it's because you've stopped orbiting. You've become your own planet, your own system. And she's trying to find her way back with habits that no longer work on a man who's rewritten his identity. You watch her adjust, and you feel nothing. Not because you're numb, but because you're free. You don't need her to change. You don't need her to come back. You just needed to become the man who could stand so still in his purpose that those who once controlled your heart now have to recalibrate to your silence. And in doing so, they discover that they never really knew you. They only knew the version of you that hadn't yet chosen himself. Number 7. You become the one she can't replace. She thought you'd always be there, not just physically, but emotionally, energetically, quietly standing in the background as a constant option, a fallback, a guarantee that no matter how far she pushed, how much she tested, how often she withheld, you'd return with open arms and open heart. And for a time she was right, because for a time you didn't know your own worth. You didn't understand that love given without standards is just permission to be used. And while she moved on with the confidence of someone who believed she'd never lose your attention, something in you changed, not all at once, but over time, as each unanswered message, each unmet expectation, each moment of emotional abandonment stacked on top of the last until the weight was too much to carry, and you finally put it down, not in anger, not in rebellion, but in the quiet acceptance that she was never going to give you what you were desperately trying to earn. And when you put it down, something else rose in its place: self-respect, clarity, peace. And that peace was deafening, not just to you, but to her. Because for the first time, you weren't reacting, you weren't chasing, you weren't offering yourself on the altar of maybe. You were just gone. Not as an act, not as a punishment, but as a man who had nothing left to give to a situation that drained him dry. And in that absence, you became something she never expected. You became rare. Not because you changed overnight, but because she started to see the difference between access and connection. The men who came after you were easy. They replied quickly. They gave compliments freely. They made plans eagerly. But they didn't challenge her. They didn't hold her accountable. They didn't reflect back the strength she once tried to weaken in you. And suddenly, you weren't just another guy. You were the one who got away. The one who didn't stay mad, who didn't stay begging, who didn't stay broken. You healed in a way that left her behind, and now, no matter what she tells herself, she can't unfeel the loss of the man who outgrew her validation. You're not a memory, you're a milestone, a turning point. The moment she realized that attention doesn't equal affection, that patience doesn't equal permanence. You were the man who proved that walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom, that staying quiet isn't giving up, it's growing up, and that not reacting isn't indifference, it's evidence that your healing worked. And that's why she can't replace you. Because while others tried to impress her, you challenged her to reflect. While others tried to win her, you walked away from the game. While others sought to be her favorite, you became the one she couldn't categorize, couldn't predict, couldn't forget. And now she lives with that, not in public posts or private messages, but in the moments when she's alone, when her heart feels something missing and she knows, deep down, that no one else has come close to filling the space you once occupied. Not because of what you gave her, but because of who you became without her. If you've made it this far, then something inside you already knows. The version of you that chased, begged, explained, and waited. He's dead. And in his place is the man she never saw coming. Not the louder one, the clearer one. The man who finally understands that validation isn't love, access isn't commitment, and waiting around is just self-betrayal in disguise. If you're done being the man who bends, who waits, who suffers in silence for the approval of someone who never deserved your devotion, then the Stoic relationship blueprint for men is your next step. It's not for the weak. It's for the man who is ready to burn the old script and rewrite his legacy forever. It's linked in the comments below, and it won't stay public for long. Because truth like this, it's not meant to be mainstream. Comment, "Detachment is power." Like this video and subscribe. Because the more you engage, the more men we save from wasting years in regret, chasing someone who never even saw their value. This is your turning point. Make it count.